All right. Welcome everybody to our EcoSprint onboarding to prepare for the BWB Summit at Fly Ranch this weekend. If everyone who's live with us can just make sure that their microphone is muted, I am really excited to introduce our guest speaker and facilitator, Robert Suarez, who is going to spend a few minutes telling us about the EcoSprint framework that we'll be using this weekend. Thank you, Robert.
Excellent. Thanks, Molly and all. What I plan to do is just run through it because we're all kind of table group facilitators, group leads of sorts across the board. So let me just run through and see what you guys think. We can have a discussion. I wanted to give a little bit of context, not a lot, but just how these kind of evolved over time and how we're using them to push solutions into the world. The foundation for Planet at Home that we built over the last year is these 16 sectors that we call planetary services. They're organized in how we eat, make, move, and live across the planet. And for a lot of our audience, they just want to understand that. If you want to go deeper, there are 16 sectors ranging from land stewardship to clean transport to biodiversity across the board. And just for you all to understand that behind every sector, we've identified opportunities for both business and real impact. For each opportunity, we have KPIs and indicators that we use to source interesting people and companies doing great work in those specific areas. So there's about 108 opportunities behind this wheel and then a bunch of KPIs, and we're building an index of solutions. So look forward to that. We want to share that as broadly as possible in the future. When I talked about a little bit about what we did. We did one in 2018. We did one recently on regenerative ecosystems, things like built environment, textiles, oceans. You can kind of see what a more formalized version of it may result in. And some of the things that came out of that were this idea of a fire lab, that we want to kind of educate people on the healthy forest and healthy fire as it relates to land stewardship. Through community education, as well as testing areas, anything from VR, AR to small business incubators. Concept of a pattern lab that gets to regenerative textiles faster, right? Again, through education and community, but also services and products that help people learn to wear things that are less textile waste. And one of my favorite was a simple idea of the team had a vision for 2030 where every school in California had an edible garden, a healthy soil program, and a community compost. They then retrocasted back to see what kind of organizations and people are doing the work now to get there by 2030. And that's very relevant to how we're working. We maintain the community through various monthly meetings, etc. And just to get into the meat of it, before we jump in, there's a couple frameworks that are the foundation of the EcoSprint. The first is really a systems thinking approach where we need to understand the interrelationships, the contingencies. When you pull in one thread, the others move accordingly. So always thinking on a bigger context and then zooming back in the details. And one thing you'll see throughout is this idea of STEEP. Some of you may be familiar with this. It came out of marketing, but we've appropriated it to apply it, in a way that when we see a challenge, we need to surround that challenge. And these are the 5 lenses that we try to bring every time. It's the sociocultural, technological, economic, environmental, and political lenses that you need to really scale these solutions and get them into market. And I'll go more into that in context. So I took a look at what we're trying to do this weekend. And within our planning services, you guys are really looking at building sustainable communities and cities, which is really compelling. I think other things, as from a systems level, right, we're going to be talking about biodiversity in these groups. We talk about certainly atmospheric conditions, material science, green manufacturing, et cetera. But really, I think the heart of this, from what I understand and what you want to do, is really building a truly sustainable community. I'm just going to get into it and talk through the process, the flow that's going to happen on Saturday. first thing we're going to have people do is team up. What we'd like to do is have someone who has some expertise or passion or relevance around those lenses and have them grouped together. So you might have someone who's a food science technologist teamed up with someone who's, I know there's an attorney that's coming out of Reno, and you want these different lenses so that when they do develop the challenges and the solutions, they're holistic in nature. So we'll have people team up, sit in their teams together. And the first step of the process is framing. A lot of times this, again, we'll have the workbooks, and I'll show you the worksheets here, but this is really about having a conversation around, 5 people are sitting together, may or may not know each other, but have various passion and expertise in the subject matters that we're attacking. And, they'll probably share that and really come to an understanding of what area will they be, spending the next 3 hours together to try to solve. And we know what a lot of those are. Let's pick, food and water in Black Rock City, right? If they choose that challenge because there's expertise and passion, try to make that more sustainable, then we're going to ask them to develop challenge statements. And the easiest way to frame these are in how might we. So how might we eliminate food waste by 2030 in Black Rock City, right? That's a pretty good design challenge because it's not just eliminate all waste, it's really focusing on food. So people can really dig in, and there's others like that. We'll ask teams to generate one or more of those. Just by experience, some teams dive right in and they have it nailed. Others will take more time and pick a few and then come back to that at a later step. But at least they're kind of honing in on what they as a collective group want to do over the next few hours. That's about a 15-minute process for everyone to kind of get to know each other and make a decision together. Next step for us is steep current. So you heard me talk about sociocultural, technological, environmental, economic, and political. And the teams need to sit down with their worksheets and identify the barriers. Right? Why is food and water, sustainable food and water at Black Rock City a challenge? Right? Why is it a challenge right now? If it weren't a challenge, if it were already existing, then we wouldn't be talking about it. It's currently a challenge and there are barriers in place, across the board. And we'll ask teams to list some of the things that are, their insights in these areas. It could be from a sociocultural perspective, it's just, food packaging and convenience has led us to, a world of plastic waste. On the political side, the food producers aren't on the hook for the plastic pollution that they generate for every time they package food, right? That's just an example of how you would go around the horn and start to identify some of the major challenges that make food and water not a sustainable activity. About 20 minutes of this, really unpacking what are the current barriers that we're facing right now, today. And then we'll ask teams to move and project into the future. So targeting 2030, and this is really a world building activity where if you come from writing or science fiction, world building is really creating that world that you want or you see existing in 2030. Breedlove, Molly, you have all been very clear where by 2030 you have your sustainable goals, and right, that's kind of the world that we ask teams to build around their subject area. So I imagine people understanding, all right, here are all the barriers. Now let's jump into the future. Let's think of ourselves in 2030, Black Rock City, technologically, let's say food, transport, delivery, and packaging, has found, we found material science that enables us to transport food in a waste-free way or in a biodegradable way. Economics of it, there's all these things that people start to project into the future and build that world that needs to exist for your sustainable goals to be successful. Again, that's about a 20-minute step where people are now building the world. So they understood the current barriers that exist. You build a 2030 world that you want to see. And you ideate in that world. I'll get feedback from you all after this call, but I think it might help to go through the rules of brainstorming for some folks. I think it helps remind everyone how this works best. There's 7 rules. It's ranging from defer judgment. So in that 20, 30 minutes that they'll spend ideating in the future, in that future world, if there aren't any bad ideas, at that point, there's time to judge on the next step. The wild ideas are the ones that push us. It's easier to dial back down. We'll do that in the later steps, but really pushing for wild ideas at the brainstorming stage. Really important to build on the ideas of others. Think in terms of and instead of but. Right? If Breedlove says, all right, we could have, apples that grow each other and spawn new apples, right? I'm not going to say, but that's impossible. I will say, and we can do that with oranges and bananas as well, right? You kind of have to build that out and build on the ideas of others and really stay focused on one subject at a time. It's really tough. This is probably one of the more difficult rules for people to abide by because everyone gets so passionate, they start to break into little pairs of 2. But then if Beck and I were in a group and we're talking about something, I can't hear what Roxy is saying on the other side, of the room, and I can't build on her ideas and come together. And that's about having one conversation at a time. We're going to encourage, especially with this group, to be visual. I think it's something that's been engineered a little bit out of modern society and education, but visualizing your ideas with stick figures or whatever else is super important, super valuable, and it helps us think differently. And finally, go for quantity. We're going to push people to really generate a lot of ideas because that's where we can find some of the silver bullets or the nuggets. So from that phase, we just jump in. I imagine people at this point are very comfortable in brainstorming, but we'll have whatever tools we need, markers and post-its to help. But we want everything to kind of land on the worksheets so people can then move forward to define, prioritize, vote, and define. So the next step is we have a bunch of ideas. We're going to get together, have a little conversation about which ones we want to push forward. And really, we're looking for one of the bigger ideas that kind of collect some of the smaller ones. So we'll ask teams to pick an idea that they want to define and move forward in this phase. And then it gets more into this idea of, right, what's the concept? Describe it in a few words so it's easy to understand. How does it solve your challenge? Who are the key stakeholders needing to move it forward? Collaborators, partners, technologies, infrastructure. Maybe a diagram or some sort of imagery so it's easy to understand and communicate. And then what's the working model, right? Is there a business model behind it, or is there a community model that needs, is this foundation for this idea? I think a lot of things are going to come down to these community models and symbiotic relationships. So we're going to ask teams to pick a big idea, start to fill this out to move it forward. And then this is probably the least intuitive but the most interesting step. So what we've done, we've framed up our challenge. We've identified what challenge we're attacking. We identified what are the barriers that exist today. We jumped into the future to build the world we want to see and need to see. And we brainstormed that future. We took an idea and built it out, right? So we defined this big idea for 2030 that needs to be at scale at 2030 and living in the world. So this next step is the retrocast. What's not intuitive is this, if we did this together, we could build up to 2030, like next step. This is the opposite of that. We built that idea in 2030. We defined it. So what we have to do is backtrack. So I put in these markers at like 2027, 2023. And then now just have teams say, if this concept needs to be at scale and implemented at Black Rock City in 2030, what needs to be in place in 2027? It's 3 years prior, right? There's probably some sort of cultural and social understanding on how we treat food and water and the value of food and water that has to be kind of across the board, across your entire community by 2027 for 2030 to flourish the way you want it to. Before that, 2023, you need some campaigns and education, et cetera, and you backtrack. Technology, if there's a technology that needs to support this future world, this future concept, what version of that needs to exist in 2027? Is there data intelligence being gathered in 2023 to support that technology? and then what do we need to do now, and so forth. So you take the 2030 future vision and idea, and you retrocast back to today. And then finally, we're back to today. We see what the future wants to be. We have a big idea that we need to exist in 2030. And then really the easiest step is, what are we going to do in the next 90 days in 3 steps: 0 to 30, 30 to 60, 60 to 90. At this point in my experience, people are really, really excited to kind of put these action points in play. We've had folks post them, so you're kind of sharing to everyone in your community, this is what we plan to do, this is what we need to do, and this is what we need help doing. These 90-day plans tend to kind of galvanize around action. And I'm leaving a lot of time, especially at this session, for sharing back, because we want to hear from every team, because we're going to need all the cross-pollination. And as we said before, even if I was on team A, but my skills and passion are really going to support team C's concept, I can go over there after our session and jump on board or jump on Slack or whatever, Molly and Breedlove, whatever you want to do to kind of do all the follow-ups. That's where the sharing is critical, so that we all know what concepts are coming out of this. And we put in a place for notes and reflections, because that's, I think, where people will start to identify what are the calls to action that I personally can take to support these ideas, or who do I need to go talk to, at 5 o'clock. So I'm going to pause there and really stop, because that's the end of our EcoSprint, or the beginning of the impact.
Great. Thank you so much, Robert. We are going to be doing this session on Saturday afternoon at the October Summit. We'll be having some programming in the morning to prime our brains for this activity. If anyone who's on live with us has any questions, now is a great time to ask them, and otherwise we will see you all very, very soon.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Robert. Can't wait to dive into this.
Yeah, for sure. I'm hoping that if there's no questions, it's either odd or just familiar to all of you.
Yep.
This is Sue, and I just jumped in right before the end here. And I'd love to flip through the screens or something like that if you have it posted somewhere afterward.
For sure. I can even run through it. We can stop recording. I can run you through myself. If you want to do that.
Recording.
If it's not too much of an imposition, I'd be happy to see it.